Okay, Nick and Andy, new Champions League is here. The new league phase format was very interesting, I think, to see it all play out. Nick, what are your main takeaways from this first week of the Champions League action? Obviously, some huge wins, a lot of US MNT players in action and scoring goals as well for big teams. It was fun, wasn't it? It was chaotic, but fun.
It was fun, and it seemed like the teams didn't really know what their philosophy was yet. It's like in any sport, when you change something significant, it's like, well, I mean, obviously we want to win the game, but how bad do we want to win the game? Because when there was 6 and this was your away game against this other team, okay, well, a point is good here, but is a point good anywhere? For example, after Man City drew Inter Milan, the first thing I thought was like, well, it's probably the hardest game, but does that matter? It was at home and they only get 4 home games, but there's 8 games and you want to be in the top 8. So it's just, I enjoyed the games. I loved watching some of the teams win. It was, it was really cool to see. It's really cool for the teams at the bottom. I think that's what I'm coming around to. So a team like Celtic, who I like watching play generally. It's nice for them to know that they will have at least 1 or 2 winnable games instead of 1 or 2 winnable games because they'd be upsets.
Yeah, I love that, Andy. I love those kind of storylines about the smaller teams getting that opportunity, because it is hard if you are kind of outside. You're still a great team. You qualify for the Champions League most seasons. But if you're outside that top bracket of 7, 8 teams, it's hard to win in the group stages in the old format. So this one does kind of keep the magic and the dream alive for a lot longer for these teams. And I think that was my favorite takeaway from this first round of games in the new format.
Yeah, variety is the spice of life, I think sums all that up pretty well. And I think it's going to be interesting to see, because familiarity, I think, is typically an advantage. Do we think familiarity with an opponent is an advantage for the lesser team or the greater team? Because I could go both ways on that. And so somebody's going to get a little bit of a surprise advantage, if you will, a little bit of unfamiliarity. Obviously, I don't think it happened in the first week of results because there were some seriously lopsided ones towards the bigger boys. But at some point, there's going to be one of these smaller sides that's going to pull off a big upset in this round. And it's going to mean something, I think, in this new format, because you just have to be in that top 24 versus, 1 or 2 bad games at the start of a group stage can essentially doom you. If your goal differential gets hit too bad, or you lose to the wrong team, the one that you're going to be fighting with for second place in the group, then, you're behind the 8 ball from the start. So it opens up a lot more possibilities, not just in terms of matchups in the league phase, but in who's going to progress into the knockout rounds. And that's the part that I'm most excited about. You really give an advantage and reward the 8 best teams and give them a round off. So, we're one round in only, but so far, I think so good.
Yeah, just to kind of explain, and you can head over to Pro Soccer Talk on NBCSports.com for a full detailed list of how this new format works. But Andy mentioned it there. The top 8 from the group stage, they go through to automatically to the last 16. They skip around. And then the teams that finished from 9th to 24th, they play each other in a separate kind of playoff round. And the 8 winning teams from those games then join the top 8 in the last 16. And then from that stage, it is, as it always was in the Champions League knockout rounds. But this, new group stage just adds that extra layer of jeopardy all the way to the end, because even if you're really struggling throughout the group stage, you can have a chance, maybe heading into the final day. A lot of teams of, having, and all the games are at the same time, by the way, on the final day, which is going to be incredible. And that will be sort of nuts. It would feel like, with a lot going on. Would love to see the red zone kind of action on that around Europe. Nick, we mentioned it there. A couple of USMNT players came up with big goals. Obviously, Weston McKennie for Juve. That was great to see him on the score sheet in their win. But Christian Pulisic and Milan got off to a flying start. He scored a great goal, but then, Liverpool just came flying back in that one. But for US players and PSV and looking elsewhere, it was pretty fruitful, right, from the Champions League perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the 2 goal scorers. I think they're the 2 most interesting people to continue to watch this season in Europe and as American players, because Pulisic has to keep being a star. He is a star. He's at the very height of his powers. He looks great and is driving the U.S. men's national team forward. And we want him in a rich vein of form for Mauricio Pochettino. McKennie is is an X factor. He's got a breath of fresh air here, mixed bag, playing for the U.S. men's national team. Certainly needs to learn how to play a little bit of a different way, which he might be getting now with Mota. But I think this is a really important time for both players in very different ways, which is funny because there was a period of time you would have earmarked both of them as, well, these are the two guys that are going to lead us. Mm-hmm. And now it's like, well, this guy's leading us and this guy is good, but how important is he? And so McKennie, to me, might be the most interesting player to watch in Europe amongst United States players this year.
Yeah, I mean, Andy, in terms of the most interesting teams to watch, I mean, from a Premier League perspective, we obviously had, wins for Aston Villa and Liverpool, draws for Man City and Arsenal. It was fun to watch Villa. Liverpool were really good once they got going. What are your takeaway from the Premier League teams early on?
Yeah, it kind of exactly what you said there. It was fun to watch Villa, the way that they newbies into the competition. They weren't scared. They weren't afraid. They weren't timid. They just kind of went for it and kind of did what they do on a regular basis. And I think they've shown that, they fit into that Champions League level and they're going to be competitive all the way through the league phase. I would back them to, they seem like a 19th place team to me in the Champions League, I think, right around there. And so they'll probably get into the knockout rounds. And again, for Premier League teams, especially this new format, it does offer a little bit of a buffer as well. And maybe you can have one or two games where you don't have to be kind of at 100% of your best performance. And on Liverpool, really quickly, they fell behind very early to Milan. And then they didn't panic. They didn't throw everything forward. They didn't take risks in a way that was going to hurt them. They just kept doing what they've been doing the first few weeks of the season. I know they lost to Forest last weekend, but just the confidence and belief to just go forward with that plan. They get a couple goals off the set pieces, and then they get one late to put the game away. They look to be, in about mid-season form now at this point.
Talking about some of the favourites then, Nick, maybe? If Liverpool obviously have won this trophy many times before, they're up there among the favourites this time. But I think we're looking at City, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, PSG, Arsenal, Liverpool. That's kind of like the top tier group there. I mean, anybody that you think is going to take it comfortably, or do you think this new format makes it a lot more complicated, maybe some of the bigger boys to navigate?
No, mostly because my sort of enduring thought when I've kept looking at the script for our show this week was, but I don't know what that team's going to be like with that coach at X point in the season. Barca looks great under Hansi Flick. Red card in the Champions League notwithstanding, but in league play they've looked phenomenal. Dortmund's looked decent under a new coach. The same PSG is adapting to an entirely new non-Mbappe world. Like there's just a lot of questions here, which would lead me to say that the dark horse is who the dark horse always is. It's Diego Simeone and Atletico Madrid.
His celebration was great.
Right. They are. I mean, they should just change their logo to a dark horse. Like that should just be that should be their crest. But it's just so difficult for me. Like we've talked about with City in the Premier League the past few years, how do you look at a Real Madrid team that won the Champions League last year, even if they were fortunate to get by City, and added Kylian Mbappe? I mean, how? It's like when City added Haaland, and I think until someone tells us otherwise, they're the front runner.
Andy, agree?
Yeah, I mean, to Nick's point, how can you look past any of those? It does come back to City, though, because of the strengthening that they kind of still have to do throughout the season, or here very shortly, presumably this weekend, maybe with, Rodri coming back into the team. The best of how many times do we praise this guy and to just kind of get through the first month of the season without him, not drop any points in the league. I know they slip up in the Champions League a little bit. It's just, there are gears that Manchester City go through in the season. And at some point, they're going to click it. They're already in a pretty high gear, but at some point, they're going to click into that highest gear. And I think they're going to be very difficult to deal with.
Yeah. I said this last season. I do fancy Arsenal purely because of the defensive side of the game. I think we saw this week against Atalanta, David Raya is absolutely at the peak of his powers. And then Gabriel and William Saliba too as well. Maybe Saliba's still got many levels to go because he's still so young, but he is pretty clearly the best centre-back in world football right now, I would say. So when you have that kind of just the solidity about them and the amount of growth they've gone through over the last 2-3 seasons now, where they've almost encountered absolutely everything, and they know that they are up against Man City for the title in the Premier League, and are basically having to play at a Champions League level every week just to stay in touch with City. It feels to me that Arsenal could go far just because of their defensive game. And then injuries, if they're lucky with those and Odegaard comes back sooner rather than later, then that's really what's going to dictate how far they go. And Atletico, I like that shout. Leverkusen, I think as well, given what they've done under Xabi Alonso, let's not discount them from making a deep run. But I do think this format is set up quite nicely that maybe even one of the teams that doesn't finish in the top 8 has that extra knockout round game to get into rhythm, momentum, and just kind of carries that and goes on a really deep run like we saw Dortmund do and reach the final unexpectedly last season. So, yeah, it's going to be a fun one. The next Champions League round, lads, we'll have everyone covered on PST. But just looking ahead to some of those games, Nick, I mean, Arsenal against Paris Saint-Germain, 2 of your guys, Borussia Dortmund against Celtic, and then Aston Villa hosting Bayern Munich at Villa Park. I mean, those are there's some brilliant games, and that's the whole reason why this new format has come around, right? Some of these big boys playing each other earlier on than they would have. Yeah,
look, I want to see Vincent Kompany in a team that I think is better than Aston Villa on the whole go up against Unai Emery, who knows his team front to back and has for a couple of years and knows tournament football. So that's number 2 on my list, Joe. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. I think the Arsenal PSG game has to be, because we don't know PSG yet. And I am starting to doubt not the completeness of Arsenal. The defense is wonderful. The attacking pieces are wonderful, but I'll save it. But let's just say I'm starting to wonder a little bit about Arsenal and how we have crowned them, because I think there are some questions that are starting to crop up.
All right. There's plenty cropping up in the Champions League, and we'll keep you covered over on Pro Soccer Talk on NBCSports.com. Great start to this new format in the league tournament, and there's plenty more twists and turns to come in these 8 match days before we even get to the knockout rounds. So keep us very busy. So head over to PST for all the latest.
Hi there, I'm Rebecca Lowe, studio host of NBC's coverage of the Premier League. Don't forget to hit subscribe to watch more videos all season long. And if you want even more Premier League content, from original series to live matches, head over to Peacock.